Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on demystifying greenwashing. My name's Jackie Musson. I am Communications Lead at Green Economy. We are a business support organisation providing end-to-end support for businesses as the UK transitions to net zero. And the Demystifying webinar series is one of the ways that we help businesses to understand some of the routes and technologies to that net zero transition. This morning's session, this afternoon session even, we'll be focusing on greenwashing, and we have a great panel here today to talk you through some of the key considerations on this topic. Becky Jedd, who is a sustainability and net zero consultant for us at Green Economy, Helen Salvin, who is head of sustainability at PHA Group, and Daniela Russo from MP & Co, who's a marketing consultant. So thank you very much for joining us, panel. Before we start the session, we'd like to run a quick poll just to kind of gauge where the audience are currently on their kind of net zero journey and understanding of this topic. Tim, do you need to do that or do I?
Yep, so I've clicked start on the poll now. So if everyone goes to the side of their screens next to the Q&A, they'll see the poll function and you can select your answer there.
Great. And then we have another question to ask as well. Great. So most voted for, are you planning to communicate your climate commitment strategies in the next year? Most people have voted not sure. And how well do you understand greenwashing? Most people have said well, which is good. Brilliant. Well, hopefully we can turn that into very well by the end of the session today. Firstly, to help kind of put this agenda into context, Becky is going to talk us through a few slides just to help us kind of understand and put into context of this topic. So over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Jackie. So yeah, I'm Becky Jedd. I'm one of the sustainability and net zero consultants here at Green Economy, helping businesses with resource efficiency, carbon footprinting, and also helping them to promote their green credentials. So we've got a quick definition of greenwashing here. It's used to describe the practice of companies launching adverts, campaigns, or products under the pretense that they are environmentally beneficial or green, but when this is in contradiction to their environmental and sustainability record in general. So we've got a nice little cartoon here that I think depicts greenwashing quite well. You know, a green aircraft would be an example of a greenwashing product because although perhaps it has got lower emissions, it is still burning fossil fuels in its engine, and there's a few other examples there that really show how companies can greenwash their products and their businesses. So it's something that people are becoming more and more aware of now, more conscious. There's lots and lots of examples of businesses who have been called out for greenwashing in the news, and it's becoming something the public are sort of becoming better at understanding and identifying. So that's what we'll hopefully help you to do today, to identify greenwashing, and we'll go through how you can avoid making misleading claims. So here there are a few sort of subtypes of greenwashing. So green crowding, green lighting, green shifting, green labelling, green rinsing, and green hushing. So there's a lot of different types of greenwashing, and again, people are becoming more savvy and more aware of these different these different types of greenwashing. So green crowding is where you're perhaps hiding in the crowd, wanting to avoid being found. Green lighting is where you would highlight a particular product or service that you offer that's more environmentally friendly, but when the rest of your services or products are less so. Green shifting is where you shift the blame onto the consumer rather than taking responsibility yourselves. Green labelling is putting a label on something to say it's green when actually it's not so green. Green rinsing is where you keep changing your targets and goals. So, for example, if you were to say, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 20% this year, but you only achieve 10% reduction, changing that goal to be a 10% reduction. And then greenhushing is where you keep quiet about your environmental credentials because you are afraid of the scrutiny and you're not quite sure how to answer on that. So there's a lot of different types of greenwashing and we're going to be going through some examples as well. I don't know if Helen or Danny, if you've got anything to add in terms of the definitions there.
I think just building on that, what's really interesting is just in the greenhushing example, it often greenhushing happens when companies don't always understand their sort of what their environmental commitments are or the impact that having an environmental stance is, and therefore they are held to scrutiny. So I think that the difference between greenwashing and greenhushing is quite interesting in that respect. And often businesses will go out with claims and you know, in the spirit that it will be taken well. You know, for example, if a drinks company goes out with a bottle that is 30% less in carbon intensive than competitors, but ultimately still uses fossil fuels, that is greenhushing. So I think it's a really good sort of way to kind of look at the differences between the two.
Absolutely. I think I'd also like to just add on that kind of green labelling aspect. I think when you have a conversation about greenwashing, it can become quite negative quite quickly, and people act out of, or rather often don't act out of fear of getting it wrong. However, the benefits of doing so and kind of having those credentials and those labels to prove so kind of give you somewhat of protection as well. But we'll touch on that later on, so I don't want to ruin any of that for you.
So yeah, we've just got a couple of examples here of greenwashing. So the first one, picture that shows a bottle that says, hello, I'm a paper bottle, but then obviously when you take off that cardboard outer layer, it's actually a plastic bottle inside. So that's a really good, clear example of green labelling where it's misleading you as to what the packaging is made of. But it's not always so obvious. So another example would be Windex cleaning product. They claimed to introduce the first ever 100% recycled ocean plastic bottle. Obviously, this implies that the plastics were retrieved from the ocean, so bottles and plastic waste that had actually been retrieved from the oceans, when in fact they'd been sourced from plastic banks, which were ocean bound but not yet in the ocean. So it's just being about being really clear with your terminology and your wording, as that one was a bit misleading there. And then probably one of the most famous greenwashing examples was the Volkswagen exhaust emissions scandal that was really big in the news a few years ago, where they lied about their testing results basically, and obviously that had huge backlash and huge impacts in terms of company reputation and also financially as well. So yeah, there's just a couple of examples there. I guess, Helen, what would you say about why businesses should care about greenwashing in terms of the risks?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, every company needs to decide their individual stance on sustainability. I know there's a lot of nervousness around overcommitting or over-communicating a business's approach, but everyone is on this journey. Everyone's at different stages of the journey, but the main thing is you're doing something about it and you're demonstrating that commitment. But being clued up on greenwashing is no longer a nice to have. It's influencing the future of sustainability communications and also the policy landscape. I mean, towards the end of 2023, the European Union passed a new law that would ban greenwashing, which means that generic environmental claims and other misleading marketing tactics will be banned, which we can expect to go into effect from around the end of 2025. So I think beyond the sort of the reputational impact and thinking about the financial hit, it's understanding just how important greenwashing is in terms of business positioning in the future of your communication strategy. So yeah, businesses need to care because there's a financial impact, there's a reputational impact, but ultimately it's determining sort of the future of the communications landscape.
Just to jump in on that one as well, there's a lot of research that's proving that as like generation shift, millennials are starting it off, Gen Z are obviously even more environmentally conscious, and obviously imagining as they're bringing children into the world, it's just going to increase in that direction. There's also the benefit of leaning into it. So I'm, by the way, forgot to introduce myself at the start. So hello, I'm a marketing consultant for a purpose-driven marketing agency. So we represent a lot of B Corps who are obviously, I think that sometimes people feel like they have to shy away from profit, and that's absolutely not the case. It's quite the opposite. In fact, I believe that it's 178% of businesses which have purpose see growth, over 75% of those who don't. So there's real incentive for doing it and kind of jumping on board. And I know that it's a lot of self-education, like Helen mentioned before. However, it's not going to be a nice to have anymore. It's going to be, are you going to be able to grow in a world or not, unfortunately? So.
Great, thanks both. I think a really interesting sort of angle on this is how greenwashing affects an organization. So if you're a leader, why you need to care about it, and how does it actually impact? Obviously it's really clear when you're when you're working directly with consumers and customers, but when you're in a B2B organization, what does that mean, and what's the different impact it may have there?
So yeah, I would say these sort of pressures and expectations do extend right the way through your supply chain. So if you're being asked to demonstrate your green credentials or have certain accreditations, you know, those pressures are likely to be passed through your supply chain. So having those open discussions with your suppliers, with your customers, and transparency across your whole value chain is really going to help you to get the messaging right and to reassure everyone in your value chain that you're all sort of working on the same project together to achieve your sustainability commitments.
Yeah, and just sort of building on that, I think being accused of greenwashing can have huge consequences to a business across the board, you know, from a customer perspective and an employee perspective, the reputational perspective as well. But usually with that reputational hit comes a decrease in, you know, customer sales, staff retention. So it's really important that businesses understand just how broad that impact can be. As Becky mentioned, it's across the entire sort of supply chain, the entire stakeholder audience. So it's vital that those risks are accounted for.
Danny, have you anything to add on that?
No, just echoing what Helen said. I think something that's quite often forgotten about is the kind of employer brand perspective and what happens from that. So being able to recover from a crisis, as Helen will touch on later, obviously you need some really good staff in place as well to be able to do so. And that kind of, I think people often think about brand as, hey, it's whether the customers are going to buy from us or not, but actually it's everyone who interacts with you, including obviously your staff, and whether they're proud to be with you. And that will obviously in turn have an impression of how much attention to detail they'll be focusing on their work, which can lead to more mistakes. So it can kind of snowball a little bit more if not dealt with correctly.
Fantastic, thank you. So moving on to how our businesses can think about how to avoid greenwashing mistakes. How do we go about embedding greenwashing concepts into an organisational culture, Danny?
Yeah, so it definitely needs to be from the top down, and everything in between, quite frankly. Obviously, culture includes everything from kind of your language, ideas, beliefs, customs. I think some people call them codes, your institutions, tools, techniques, absolutely everything. So I'd say that to start, probably start with the strategy. If you don't have the board on board, then it's really difficult to ensure it's effectively rolled out. So we have ensured that we're currently going through B Corp, waiting for accreditation, hopefully in the next few days. But that means that you really have to look even into your legal structure and how that's all put together. But we've embedded it into our company objectives for the year, so that our sustainable development goals, our environmental goals, they are exactly that we're focusing on it. It's spoken about every day. It's spoken about in all of our senior leadership meetings, and also then kind of filtered down so into the team as well. So actually, how is it in their objectives, and what does it mean for them? How can they contribute to it? So through volunteering days, even like how they get to work, whether we're doing remote working to reduce emissions, and kind of trying to help them educate and inspire as well. So I think it's very much you can't do one thing, it has to be everything, and it has to be embedded within everything. And I think something often forgotten is obviously a reward system. So quite I see in marketing very often, obviously we're incentivizing overconsumption, which is not very sustainable in itself, could be very difficult. And if you don't target the kind of rewards at the basis and kind of reflect what incentives might be. So for example, instead of who's made the most sales or upsold as much as possible, if we got sustainability champ of the month, when we're doing corporate gifting, for example, are they sustainable in themselves? Are we encouraging people to bike to work in our rewards and our health benefits? So it just needs to be embedded in absolutely everything. And obviously, I think the operational ones are obviously clearer when you're thinking about, particularly in your industry, understanding the using cleaner resources. Makes it a lot easier. But yeah, kind of making it easy for people, educating them, and then inspiring them, because it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be better.
Yeah, and also just to quickly build on that, I forgot to mention, but PHA, we work with a mixture of sort of SMEs and big corporates, and an external affairs lead that I work with who heads up the department for a sort of big drinks manufacturer. She believes it's her job to really sort of communicate the need for sustainability across all levels of the business. And she highlighted to me recently the importance of sort of storytelling and getting the whole company on board, presenting the why to different teams. So for example, if it's the marketing team, it's explaining, if we don't get our communications right online, then we could be getting backlash. It's your job to make sure we're not getting that backlash. If it's the finance team, it's about, okay, this is the legislation we're having to abide by. This is the financial impact of not abiding by said legislation. It's speaking their language and telling that story in a way that resonates with them. So I think it's about fostering that internally and getting every single department on board. And connecting it to their individual sort of objectives and remits.
Oh, great, thank you. Just as a reminder to the audience, if you've got any questions, we will be having a Q&A at the end. So do post your questions and we can ask that to the panel later on in the session. So, what should you consider when structuring your environmental messaging? So, how we position this for an internal and an external audience? Danny, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I'd say that the approach to both should be the same. So marketing is marketing, and you need to obviously have that end customer in mind. But whether they're internal and we're talking more on a peer-to-peer basis, or an external audience, we need to be considering obviously who, what, why, and like Helen sort of touched on before, the so what, why should people care? So I think that's the bit of where the structuring is probably slightly different for them, because it's the application of them as a consumer versus them as an employee, and obligation versus whether it applying to them. So I'd say throughout kind of some core rules to live by that I would recommend to clients is we work very closely with an environmental agency called Tyler Grange. They're brilliant, but obviously they could be questioned for sustainability and the fact that actually they're helping their clients to build. So they've had some backlash from that in the past, particularly from Extinction Rebellion, because obviously they are helping people get planning permission, however, in a way that is better for the environment. So I would say that when we've tried to tackle those kind of communications, it's all about transparency. So when we're saying that we're a better alternative, how? Because actually it would be the better option be to not do it at all. So we need to be really specific in that language. We've also got some really credible standards. So they're B Corp. They produce a really rigorous impact report that's online. I think that it was like 100 and something slides this year. This is the first one they've done, which is much more in depth than you're actually required to do. Others that we've supported through it have only done a very top line one. That's for the reason that actually putting that out into the public domain is very useful, because it can be used as evidence and a bit of a barrier for them as well. Also, to focus on genuine sustainability, I think that it's very easy to focus on superficial green marketing, and kind of at every point, whether internal or external, educating stakeholders. So there's a lot of education within their business as well to ensure that their team understand what they're actually doing. So our lighting, you might see, I've actually had to override it today. So we share an office with Tyler Grange, and their lighting goes off every 10 minutes if it's not in use. So if I sit still, the lighting will go off on me. It's one thing to be able to put these new processes in place, these new systems in place, and obviously for it to be a benefit. But if you're not communicating that to your team, they're not aware, so they won't be able to share that on to when they have a client come in, for example. So they've inspired as well. And it's just those little things of actually who needs to know this, and why does it care? Why does it matter to them? So yeah, I think transparency, some standards, and educating at every level, making sure that we really apply it to that. So what, why should they care?
Helen, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those points. I think the central the central point for me is just be honest. Don't mislead in any way. And if you're unsure, check it. Don't use a term that, you know, might be misconstrued or isn't 100% backed up. Be really clear. Try to avoid any vague language. You know, it's tempting to use phrases like eco-friendly or green, but they are overused and they can be misleading if not substantiated. So make sure you're doing that. Also, I'd say, you know, make sure you're leveraging data and facts to the best of your ability. And use this to connect with your audience, not just on a sort of a rational level, but an emotional level, to inspire action and to demonstrate the impact you're having on the world. But try not to be careful to be too wishy-washy and to be too sort of flowery in your language, because ultimately it's a serious conversation and a serious matter. But yeah, I think the main sort of message from me is always be honest, always be transparent about areas where you may fall short and where you're exceeding. I think what Oatly does is really interesting. I think one of the big sort of greenwashing allegation or greenwashing allegations often come from, for example, when H&M created its climate conscious range. Yes, it might be developed in a more climate conscious range way, but it is ultimately not fully sustainable and is being used as a marketing tactic. So they've had a huge amount of criticism as a result. Oatly, on the other hand, it goes about it slightly differently and displays the kilograms of CO2 emissions associated with each of its products, which I think is a fantastic way to just demonstrate that accountability and set a new benchmark for transparency in sustainability communication. So I think try to turn things on their head and don't sort of be tempted to use sustainability as a marketing ploy. Yeah, that's my kind of main message to everyone. Oh,
okay. I think you're muted. Oh, there we
go. So Becky, what information should organisations be sharing? What should they be shouting about?
Yeah, so definitely, if you have been implementing energy efficiency measures, if you've been working on green projects within your business, definitely shout about them. Don't be afraid to sort of keep them secret or keep them internal, but make sure that the information that you are promoting is accurate, truthful, and can be backed up with proof. So if anybody was to scrutinise your claims, you've got the evidence to show exactly what you've done. So as we've sort of heard before, try not to be too vague, be specific about what you've done. If you've got numbers and percentages that can be backed up, definitely put those out there. It's also a really good idea to have a sustainability webpage on your website where you can put details of all the projects that you've been working on, your targets, the progress to date. So it's a great source of information where anybody from the public can go and find out about what you've been up to, and you've got that transparency there that explains more detail around the projects that you've been working on and why you're making these claims. So definitely put the information out there, but make sure that you can back it up and make sure that it is accurate. So don't over exaggerate any claims, and don't be vague, just be direct. Even if the progress isn't as much as you would like it to be, it's better to be honest and say, this is where we're aiming to get to, and this is what we're going to do to get there. It's all about being on a journey. It's not about being perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect business. So just be really transparent in where you're at on your journey and what you're doing to improve.
That's great. Danny, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's, I actually saw something out of my office earlier. So there was a Tesco van and it says on the side, better for the planet. And it made me laugh because I know that this has changed since its original iteration. So it now says, I'm going to bring it up to remind myself the exact wording, because the wording does matter. They've got a side and it says greener greens, and it says this electric van will help lower our emissions. And on the side, it says better for the planet, better for you. So originally they were very vague and they just said better greener greens, and it had no depth to it. It didn't specify how. Tesco have also had to go a step further, and obviously they've then been questioned, how much are they improving? Are they replacing their whole fleet? So again, it's just that transformative bit that Becky touched on before, that yes, you're not the finished product ever. Even people with all the resource at their hands may not be making the change immediately overnight. However, you really need to be honest that, hey, this van is helping lower it. We've not removed all of the other fleet off of our kind of, they've not been removed. They're not obsolete anymore. And yeah, I suppose again, just echoing what Helen said before about avoiding the ambiguous kind of claims. We see a lot of people just say eco-friendly, and I think it's very difficult to prove what that actually means. So there's no universal standard for or definition for green and eco-friendly. So it's making sure that if you can prove exactly why, so like Becky said, if someone questions why are you making that claim, if you can't go back to them within B Corp kind of standard is they give you 48 hours to prove evidence. So if you can't kind of adhere to that kind of standard and turn around and give them the data that proves why you've said that within 48 hours, I'm going to really struggle and question why the claim was made in the first place. So we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to claim that we're perfect. But being on the journey and being better and moving in that direction is really important.
Fantastic. So Helen, do you think you could kind of talk about what statements businesses should avoid? I know you've obviously said terms like eco-friendly, but is there anything else that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few different terms that we need to be cautious about using. So for example, if you're using the term natural, that could include anything found in nature, but it doesn't mean the ingredients are good for you. So you need to be really careful about how you're using the word natural. Also with organic, that typically means that a product has been grown, raised, or produced without pesticides or genetic modification. So you need to make sure that if you are using that term, it absolutely is an organic certified product. Also, it's worth noting that some organic products still contribute to deforestation or industrial scale monoculture farming. So even though your product might be on organic, it might still have its environmental flaws. Green is undefined and vague. I think I mentioned that. It's also sort of tied to environmentalism or eco-consumerism, which is often sort of connected to greenwashing. So you need to be mindful of that. Another sort of term that's used frequently is biodegradable. That is sort of the quality of something is whether sort of partially or completely biodegradable within a human lifetime, but the percentage of biodegradability and how it's measured varies widely. So that can also be held to some scrutiny. So you need to be really, really sure and confident that the words you're using to describe your products are 100% valid and credible.
Absolutely. So helping businesses to build confidence in their narrative. I think we've obviously talked about what they should say proactively, but how do they respond to feedback from clients, customers, or people on social media? What are some of the tactics for dealing with potential claims that you're being hypocritical or it's unfounded or a myriad of other things that someone might say? Helen, I think you were going to jump in on this one.
Yeah, so just I guess from an external perspective, it really depends on the claims that are being and the allegations that are being made against the company. I think the airline industry is in a really interesting place at the moment. The European Union is coming down hard on the likes of KLM and Lufthansa for marketing green flights, which use sustainable aviation fuel as opposed to normal fuel, or will offset carbon used in the flights. It's interesting because the European Commissioner is saying that airlines are being cute about the way they're using this sort of marketing tactic. Airlines are saying, no, we're doing everything we can to reduce our impact, and we're helping consumers make those choices for themselves as well and be part of that journey. So they're being quite sort of combative in the way that they're sort of responding to the allegations. And I think it's important that companies do hold their own when they feel that, they are under attack and that it's not warranted, or that they have their own argument. But I think also there are lots of examples where companies genuinely have fallen short or marketed themselves in a way that is problematic. And I think it's about conducting a thorough review of what has actually happened, and being really sort of transparent about sort of what the situation is and what the sort of the next steps are, and also striking an apologetic tone if needed. Nobody wants to see that kind of combative nature from a company that has clearly greenwashed and been sort of and has been dishonest about its products or about its sustainability status. So I think it's very much a case-by-case basis. Often, you know, I think it's good to get that sort of external crisis support if it's really, you know, gotten to that point where you're getting a lot of backlash. But yeah, always honesty is the best policy. I know it's a cliche, but it's true.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
completely agree with all of that, and I think that is the bit to focus on, the honesty. I think from a practical perspective as well, I would jump in and say, I know that you said before, Helen, about a considered approach. So I would just kind of build on that and just say, don't rush to respond. It can be, you can feel a bit triggered, I suppose, if you see particularly perhaps on social media, you might feel particularly in smaller businesses, like I need to squash this quickly before it becomes something. But actually, if it's not a considered approach, if you've not been able to do the full kind of look into what's happened and a full response, then actually you're likely to make it much, much worse. So I would say that be fast to act, but very considered, and you don't have to have the answer straight away. You can, it is still addressing it by saying, thanks for bringing it to our attention, we're going to look into this. That's still not you burying your head. It just means that you're not ready to respond in full.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on this from having to sort of have these sort of conversations myself on online, and I think there's a couple of things that you can kind of think about, like spending a couple of hours sitting down and actually thinking about what could people challenge you on, and having that in your head in advance, I think is probably not a bad thing. But also, you're not going to be able to please everybody, but equally, we don't all have to be net zero tomorrow. It's a journey. So if you're making steps in the right direction, that's something to be celebrated. And as long as you've got a plan in place for the future, I think that's kind of, yeah, we're getting to that, and we're doing everything we can, but we're a small business and it's going to take time, and that's okay. And I think that owning that is actually quite powerful.
Yeah, and also just on that, I guess preparing for big moments. For example, we have a client that recently published its sustainability report, and there are a few targets that they are, you know, struggling to achieve. So, you know, we supported them in developing the FAQs around that, helping them to prep for any questions from the media or external stakeholders. So I think it's just making sure that you are bulletproof in your messaging and you're being transparent about the situation, and you know, that you're able to kind of make sure that you're ready for that criticism before it lands is a good piece of advice, I think.
Definitely. And taking advice as well. So, I mean, obviously businesses in Greater Manchester can get access support through Green Economy, and Becky, we're able to sort of support people with checking their environmental policies and their claims and things like that. But obviously your organisations work with businesses to do that as well. So bringing in outside experts to help consult on this is definitely a really good piece of advice. So as a consumer, thinking about as a business, as being you know, as we're scrolling and shopping on whatever we're shopping in the evenings, but also as a business, how can businesses spot greenwashing and other organizations that are doing this? So sort of flipping it on reverse and making sure that you're working with or buying from organizations that you know are credible.
I'll jump in on this, because there's actually quite a few ways. So obviously I mentioned before about needing to embed this in your values and your culture. So I'd first give it a bit of a culture test, a bit of a taste test. So if you come across something and it's a bit unexpected, you think, for example, H&M sustainable, that's a bit odd. I mean, that would first be thinking, let's look a little bit more into this. But also kind of keeping in mind, what's their motive? What have they got to gain from it? So are they going to get are they going to get a bigger share of the market by appealing to an environmentally conscious customer? Probably, to be honest, particularly in certain industries as well. I'd also be kind of having a nosy into what sources they're using for some of their, we've all seen a lovely hair commercial that says 90% out of their 10 surveyed who were paid said that they liked it. So I'd be checking their credentials, checking their sources, looking for kind of those traditional kind of very thorough signs of approval, like your B Corp stamp, that obviously there's very, very intensive kind of operational level kind of scrutiny from the B Corp process, but also you have to prove that you can keep it every year as well. So I'd be looking for kind of credentials and sources, and I'd also just kind of be having to think, is what they're claiming too perfect? If someone's claiming that they've solved climate change, then obviously they haven't, let's be honest. So just echoing what everyone said today, honesty is the best policy. And if it feels a bit too good to be true, as a consumer, I'd very much be thinking, where are your receipts? And if they're not there, there's probably a reason why. They probably don't have them.
Yeah, and also just building on that with a few, I guess, sort of marketing tactics that businesses use. I think you've got to be watching out for the hidden trade-offs. So, you know, there might be promotion of responsible behavior in one area, like using less water, but that could also sort of obscure harmful behavior in another area. So, for example, mining non-renewable materials, such as virgin plastics. And then also the lesser of two evils is often a common sort of greenwashing tactic. So that's highlighting the benefits of a product, like being made from cotton instead of synthetics, but then obscuring the sort of the negative elements, like spraying those cotton fields with pesticides and other sort of other sprays. So I think it's kind of being on the watch out for those. And then also misleading labels that sort of neglect to provide all of the information about a product or a service, like so for example, labeling something as compostable without distinguishing between sort of backyard composting or industrial composting sites. I think it's about kind of being a bit more kind of just making sure you're reading the labels properly, and that you're properly, as a business, providing all of the details that you need to be providing within that labeling. And then, of course, vague marketing that can't substantiate claims without sort of proof. So any sort of broad, generalized language that's hard for consumers to define is a really big one to look out for. And green imagery is often, you know, sort of used, and instantly consumers will connect that as being link it up with sustainability, but actually it's not a sustainable product. It's just using green plants and sort of recycling symbols within the imagery, but it's just another form of greenwashing. Just another point to just mention here is anything that is connected to sort of scorecards or carbon calculators. I think they're under a huge amount of scrutiny now, and I think BP has been very much scrutinized for its use of carbon calculators in the past, and putting the onus on consumers instead of themselves. So I think anything to do with carbon calculators or scorecards is pretty much a big red flag from a greenwashing perspective.
Yeah, Becky, what would you say would be what is the starting point in terms of for a business to sort of benchmark themselves and shout about how can they do that in a sort of legitimate way?
So firstly, identify if you have anybody with sustainability expertise in-house to begin with. Get them to check over your figures if you've been calculating your carbon footprint yourself. Get a second pair of eyes on that, but also reach out and see if you can get any third-party verification as well. So obviously here at Green Economy, we can offer that support to help businesses to calculate their carbon footprint, but also if you've done those calculations yourself, we can review those and verify those. There are other external bodies as well who offer more formal certification of carbon footprinting as well. So having that sort of more official label that your carbon footprint has been fully reviewed and verified. But yeah, just making sure that you've got all your numbers correct, you've got all of those statistics and figures, and yeah, just sharing those, making sure that people are checking those, making sure there's not any obvious errors. You know, often when people are doing the calculations, they might be off by a factor of 1,000. So just having someone who can do that sense checking for you is really helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely verify for that 1,000 being very nice and confusing.
You know, if you need to convert between kilograms and tons, all of that type of thing.
Absolutely. So just sort of a few final questions before we sort of round up for today. I think it would probably be helpful just to kind of summarize. So if our audience are thinking, right, I want to communicate our climate strategies and commitments in the next year, what's their 5 steps to go about doing that? Helen or Danny, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I can't say that it's 5 steps. I think it's we'll have to count them as I go, but I'd say first of all, you got to figure out where on earth you are. So when people come to us and they want to start making claims, obviously first things first, have an audit. Like we touched on before, you need to know what's happening across the board. So I'd be understanding where you are and what impact you're having. I'd be really specific about your goals as well. I think that's really important. So is this number 2, set goals maybe? I know that in business, obviously, you've spoken about SMART goals a lot. I'd kind of apply that to this. Obviously, you really want to be specific. Helen was touching on that before, that obviously avoiding those vague claims are really specific, but also measurable. We were talking about the quantifying and proving with statistics. So I think that's really important to set out with that in mind. Achievable, obviously you're not going to be solving climate change, realistic, and obviously with a time scale on as well. I think that timeline bit is really, really important. Yeah, being transparent throughout, I suppose, being specific. And I suppose, like we've touched on before, I think that there's no shame in talking about your journey and appreciating that this is the standpoint that, hey, we can use that as an opportunity to go out and talk to people and say that this is where we're starting and this is what we want to achieve, because I think that using that as a message as well is very nice. We've done that before with a lot of our clients that will use as a bit of accountability, actually, the objectives that they set themselves. It's quite nice to share that, particularly if your culture is very transparent, you talk with your customers as peers. I think that it's really good, if that's your value of being transparent and honest, to be able to include that. And yeah, seek feedback. That's another step for sure. So, I mean, we're figuring out where we are. We are going to set some goals. We're going to start attacking it. And then we've got to review and seek feedback, I suppose. There's many, many others that I'm going to let Helen probably jump in and provide a bit more clarity on there. Definitely got a bit excited there.
No, that's great. Yeah, there are so many steps, and obviously I work for a communications consultancy, so we're not really, you know, in the business of defining sustainability strategy. However, we do work with sustainability consultancies. We have clients that sort of specialize in carbon calculation, in sustainability strategy. So it's always interesting to hear their perspective on this. So yeah, knowing where you are in your journey, as Danny mentioned, and focusing on what matters most to the organization. You know, we've mentioned a few times, you're not going to solve climate change, the climate sort of questions of the entire sector. Just focus on the areas that you feel matter to your business and that you can make a real impact with. So I'd say kind of make sure that you're not spreading yourself too thinly. Also, I know I've mentioned it a few times, but it's so important, just gathering the right data. You can't measure progress without having the data and understanding what your general impact is. So making sure you're investing in those tools. There's so much available. Obviously, Green Economy provides a lot of that support. So make sure you're investing in those areas. And then keeping it sort of action orientated. I think, you know, Danielle has spoken a lot about the kind of the the steps you can set up internally and the different initiatives you can introduce to make sure that you're bringing everyone on board and that you're actioning climate change or issues related to climate change versus just talking about it. So I think that's a really important one. And yeah, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think it's better to just get things started, because you're going to have to eventually anyway, and ultimately it's going to give you a competitive edge in the long run. So just get moving with it, and yeah, make sure you're reporting and reporting well, getting people to support with that if needed. Yeah, those are my key bits of advice.
Yeah, I think we just add to that, like as a bit of a summary, is taking that holistic approach. It's not just, you might have a green product and service, but it means nothing if you've not thought about the whole organisation. And that's really helpful. Thank you so much, everyone. That's been a really interesting session, and it's really helpful to have that expertise. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat now. So just before we close things off, we'd like to run another poll just to see if there's been any kind of change in understanding and plans. So Tim, are you able to, oh, it's already up. So how well do you understand greenwashing off the back of this? Brilliant. So the result of how well do you understand greenwashing? 100% very well. Fantastic. So we've definitely helped people to understand that during this session, which is great news. And plans to communicate. Yeah, most voted for is now yes rather than don't know. So thank you very much, everybody, for contributing to the poll. That's really helpful. As we said before, there will be a recording of this session, which we'll be sharing at the end of the later on today. So if you don't follow us already, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're on, you can find us on all those different locations, and we're sharing content all the time to try and help businesses to make sense of their journey to net zero. So just before we go, just a little bit more information about what we do as an organisation. As we've mentioned, businesses that are based in Greater Manchester and in York can access fully funded support from Green Economy. We can come on site and review your business. We can run a carbon footprint. We can advise on green tech investment. We can give you grants. We can we can direct you to funding and finance. We offer a range of different training, be that high level, which will kind of guide you through the full process of how you're going to go to deliver net zero, through to carbon literacy training as well for your workforce. There's all sorts of wonderful things on offer on our website. Just have a good look. And also we can give you that go-to-market advice. So Becky and her colleagues are able to take a look at your environmental policy and make sure that what you're saying is true and verifiable. As I mentioned before, this is part of our Demystifying webinar series, which we deliver in partnership with Be Net Zero. The next one will be taking place on the 9th of July, and that will be on solar and storage technologies. And there's a QR code link there if you want to make a booking for that one. We will be sending an email out at the end of the event so that you can register if you want to join us for that one. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can see all the previous webinars we've delivered, sessions on heat pumps, webinar, all manner of different technologies. I've completely forgotten them now. Carbon offsetting was one we did recently. Anyway, that's pretty much everything from us. Just get in touch if there's anything you need. We're always happy to help. And thanks once again to our panel who've been absolute experts today. Really appreciate it. Great. Thank you, everyone.